workshop is on engaging students through a culturally responsive, trauma-informed lens. And I'm hoping that all of you, again, will learn a few things from this presentation. So 2 specific learning goals that I have is that you're able to identify behaviors that are associated with ACE and apply what you've learned about brain science and adaptation to better understand your students, and to recognize how ACE, or adverse childhood experiences, and environmental conditions can impact growth, development, and learning, and the crucial role that we as educators play, as well as the schools that we work for, in reducing risk factors and increasing protective factors. So let me start by saying that there is a definite chasm. There is a divide between the common view of behavior and the trauma-informed view of behavior. So let's start with the common view of behavior. What does that look like? It views negative behavior solely as the student's choice. And most of the consequences, whether it's coming from us as staff, whether it's coming from family members, it's usually punitive. It consists of shaming the person, guilting them, forms of isolation where they're not included in certain things. And all of those are supposed to be used as motivators to get them to do what they're supposed to do. We also characterize these students as lazy and undisciplined, lacking self-control and motivation, and expectations of failure, unfortunately, are communicated to these students on a regular basis, whether verbal or whether non-verbal. But I want to take you to a little activity. It's really a mind activity. But if you were given specific adjectives that described you, whether you were, quick to be on something, or whether it would take you some time to do it, or whether you, were, I'm trying to think of some adjectives, and now, of course, they're escaping me. But in any given situation, if you're given 1 or 2 choices, most of us would say, well, in some situations, I may be that, but in other situations, I may be that. So who I choose to be or how I choose to react may depend on the situation or what's going on in my immediate environment. But we very, very seldom give that same courtesy to other people. Their characteristics are simply who they are, regardless of their situation. And in psychology, that term is called the Fundamental Attribution Era. We rarely think about other people's situations and what could cause them to make some of the decisions or choices that they make. So staff don't take in consideration the whole student. We want people to take in consideration that we're not just educators. We're not just staff members at a college, but we are also individuals. So when we look at our students, we have to realize that they are first individuals. And then looking at students in this day and time, they're not the traditional students that we always saw that just kind of graduated from high school or coming to college and all of their attention is being focused on college. No, we have a smorgasbord of individuals that are coming to college. Some of them are very non-traditional. They're older students that already have families. Some of them, may not be non-traditional, but they work full-time jobs and they're having to pay for everything on their own. So being a student may not be their top priority. So when we are looking at our students, we have to take in consideration the whole student. So this is where I need your help. Does anybody know what that is? And you can come off of mute and we can communicate. It's not a lecture. I like dialogue. Does anyone know what that is?
The courts?
It is not, but good guess. Believe it or not, that is a diamond in its rarest form. That is a diamond. Now, how many of you, married, not married, If somebody came to you with that, would be like, oh my God, do you see this diamond on my finger? Oh, look at this. This is a 5 carat. How many of you would be elated to wear this particular diamond on your finger? If we were honest, yeah, I don't care that that's a diamond, but you have to come with something a little bit better than that. Exactly. So, one of the things that we don't know about a diamond is that it is the hardest natural rock that there is on Earth. So, with that said, who knows the only thing that can cut or shape a diamond? Thank you, Barbara. A diamond in the rough. You were actually correct with that. What is the one thing that can shape or cut a diamond?
Another diamond?
Another diamond. So essentially, I want you to keep in mind that we are all diamonds with the power to shape and or cut one another. So the question becomes, are we doing more shaping or are we doing more cutting? So of course this went backwards on me.
Recording
So
is
once
on.
we have seen the diamond, now the next step is to actually cross over that chasm. So here's my question for you. What does this mean when we say the brain is a historical organ? What do we mean by that? The brain is a historical organ. Does anybody know what that means?
I'm sorry, I'm doing all the talking. Anybody else want to go?
Chime in whenever you want. The brain is a historical organ. What does that mean to be historical?
Memory, things aren't forgotten so easily. It seems like you got it. It's stored somewhere.
It stores everything. Everything that you go through, everything that you experience. Yes, Amy, it remembers. It literally only waits on what? Something to trigger it to memory. Okay? So that's something I want you to kind of keep in your bank as we move on to talk about trauma. So here it is. What is trauma so that you can see this well? It's the intense event that happens to any person that threatens or causes harm to their individual, to that individual, either emotionally and or physically. Now, when it happens to a child, it is considered adverse childhood experiences, or ACE. And the chronic stress response inducing events that cause it for children can be underneath of one of these. Acute, which occurs in a particular time and place, and it's usually short or short-lived. Chronic occurs over a long period of time. Complex is multiple events over long periods of time. And then there's medical. So when we look at acute, the school shooting that just took place in Texas, know that those children are definitely going to be traumatized from that. Looking at natural disasters like the levee that broke in Louisiana, and so many people that, perish from that. Look at serious accidents that take place, whether you're in the car or whether you're watching it happen. Sudden or violent loss or death of a loved one or someone close to you. Physical sexual assaults. We have CLD. We have chronic that occurs repeatedly over a long period, which can be different forms of physical and sexual abuse, long-standing abuse, domestic abuse, emotional abuse. Many people have never looked at it, but mental illnesses or addictions are also part of that. And if you didn't know what CLD is, I think we've all dealt with that coronavirus virus, COVID. I think we all are familiar with that one. So all of these play a part in ACE. And it has actually taken COVID to really bring out trauma, and that people are not dealing with it in a good way. May 15th, the New York Times brought out an article that said students are not okay. So COVID has brought a lot of light to trauma when we know that this has been going on for decades. So let's look at how ACE relates to childhood development. ACE is characterized by three different things: abuse, neglect, and family household challenges. Now, for the most part, we know what abuse is. That's characterized by physical, sexual, and emotional. We know what neglect is. But what does it mean when we talk about family and household challenges? What does that mean? What are we talking about there? Anybody know? Family, household challenges? You're muted, so we cannot hear you. We want to hear you.
Possibly poverty. Well, marital problems that the children are experiencing. I'm guessing.
And you're on the right track. We don't know where our next meal is coming from.
Yeah.
We haven't had electricity or water, unemployment, risk of homelessness, hunger. Yes,
All of that.
definitely, man.
I work in outpatient mental health, and just being able. I'm not a therapist, but I'm the director here. But just being able to address then the diagnosis that they're experiencing, because if they're not eating, if their only meal that they get is when they go to school, and
there
then
you go. So
what?
not knowing where their meals are coming from, having to move from one place to another, some of them even living in what they call squatter houses that have been abandoned, and that's where they live. So these are some of the situations that we are dealing with. So I put out a poll earlier on WUVA, and it asked, according to the CDC, what percentage of children in their first year of life experience victimization? So I had 20 people answer, and I'm going to have you guys take a minute just to kind of look at that. And in the chat, let me know whether you think it's A, B, C, or D. I'm going to give you a second to do that.
Oh, gosh. What happened to you now?
So we have C, 15%, D, 33%. Anyone else want to take a stab at it? We have a second D for 33%, C, 15%. So from the poll that I took, out of 20 people, 13% said no. 3 of them said 13%, 5 said 24%, 7 of them said 15%, and 5 of them said 33%. So, believe it or not, the answer is 24%. So almost a quarter of every child born experiences victimization before they turn 1. Now, I also want you to take these statistics also into account that are also from CDC. 16%, or 1 out of each 6 adults, has experienced at least 4 types of ACE. 61% have experienced at least 1 type of ACE. So when you think about working with adults, adolescents, young adults in the classroom, think about the percentage of them that have dealt with trauma. Doesn't mean 1 in 4 of them has. You could have 76% of that 24% in your classroom. You could have 98% of that 61% in your classroom. So these are things to take into consideration. So when we're looking at trauma, I want you to understand what I mean when I say stress. Because there's positive stress, there's tolerable, and there's toxic. I'm not talking about the stress that comes when you're on the computer and that wheel keeps going around telling you and it's buffering and you're ready to kick the computer off the table. That's not what I'm talking about. Then we have tolerable. Yes, it's serious situations where your stress response system may be activated, but that usually has a buffer because you have supportive relationships. I'm actually talking about that last one. when you're dealing with prolonged stress that continues to have your stress activation system in flux and you don't have support to help to buffer that. So let's look at what that looks like. ACE actually affects the developing brain in many ways that then impact our behavior, our cognitive development, and our physical health, whether we know it or not. So what you're looking at here is a CT scan. On the left is the 3-year-old brain that's normal, and on the right is one from extreme neglect. Now, you may be wondering, well, why is a 3-year-old brain important? Because by the age... Uh-oh. Hello? Is that Barbara?
It made me so sad, Janice. I just so sad listening and watching all this. I'm sorry, I should have muted myself.
It's okay. It's okay, because I don't expect people to actually hear this and not be okay. But it's something that everyone needs to know. It's so because sad. We don't know what we don't know. And when we have these students coming in class and we're judging them off of their behavior without knowing their backstory. And I'm going to share some things with you when we go further into it that I think will be helpful as well. But one of the reasons why I show the 3-year-old brain is because by 3 years old, 90% of our brain is actually developed. And whether you know it or not, the brain develops from the back, which is the reptile brain, to the front. And it develops based off of the experiences that we have. So if the experiences are toxic, that's what's important to the brain to develop. We'll talk about that in a little bit. To bring it home for you, I wanted to show you also a PET scan that also shows the brain of a healthy 6-year-old versus the brain of one that has been through neglect. Now, keep in mind, neural development affects neglect, or on a bigger scale. Research has really just kind of come full circle when it comes to neglect, and it was based off of some research and results that were based on cases of children in Romania that lived in an orphanage that had very minimal care and very minimal social interactions. So if you look at the brain, those two circles, all that black area shows very little activity. Why is that important? Because that is the temporal lobe of the brain. In the temporal lobe of the brain, 3 things take place, 3 major things: understanding of language, memory acquisition, and processing of emotions and memories associated with fear, which is our amygdala. So that's where our fight, flight, and or freeze kind of take place. So I want you to kind of keep that in your memoirs. I also wanted to show you, I couldn't pull it up, but Daniel Goleman, he's a psychologist, and he's very well immersed in emotional intelligence. So I want you to keep in mind what he said. As a repository for emotional memory, the amygdala in the brain scans experience, comparing what is happening now with what happened in the past. Its method of comparison is associative. When one key element of a present situation is similar to the past, it can call it a match. It frantically commands that we react to the present in ways that were imprinted long ago with thoughts, emotions, reactions learned in response to events perhaps only dimly similar, but close enough to alarm the amygdala. I want you guys to keep that in your repertoire as we continue on. So understanding that, we now know that what? Though during those childhood years, that's when all those neural connections need to take place. And if the state of the brain is in constant stress, those neural connections that need to take place are not going to take place. So that means there can be delays in what? Language development, fine skills or fine motor skills. You'll find children with high impulsivity, learning and attention problems, this all takes place as a result of what? Those connections not taking place in the brain. So keep that in your mindset as we continue to go on. So let's talk about the stress response system. This is basically how it works. You have a stimulus that comes in. The emotional brain senses that there's a potential threat, and it gives an alarm, sets the alarm off. Now, the thinking brain then takes a look and says, okay, let me check this out. And then if they confirm that the threat is real, the thinking brain then goes offline and the emotional brain takes over. Now, remember the quote I just gave you from Daniel Goleman. When the emotional brain takes over, it then makes comparisons that may not be correct, but because they seem the same, it's going to make those comparisons. And then the emotional brain is going to initiate fight, flight, and freeze. Depending on the situation, your amygdala is going to talk to your hippocampus and ask, hey, what do we know about this? What should we do? If it feels like you can fight, you'll fight. If it feels like you can freeze, you'll freeze. Or if it feels like you can flight, run, you'll run. If the brain is unsure as to what to do, you'll be frozen. There'll be that time where you're just standing there. So you are going to react based off of the brain's memory of any similar situation. Your thinking brain will then come back online when things seem to be a little bit safe, and it's going to help calm you down. But during that time, you have increases in heart rate and blood, increases in blood sugar, increases in blood flow to the muscles, and increases in your breathing, as well as cortisol being pumped into your system. Why? Because we want to make sure that whatever action we need to take, we can take it. So this is where your sympathetic system is going to come in, shut everything down that is not important to your survival at that time, so that energy can all be placed where it needs to be placed. Your hypothalamus is going to talk to your pituitary gland, because your hypothalamus runs everything in your body. Your pituitary gland is the master gland in your body, and it's going to talk to everybody else, adrenaline and all the rest of them, to start pumping these hormones into your body. Now, keep in mind that cortisol is a life-saving hormone in emergency situations. However, it is very toxic to certain neurons in the brain. So if this is constantly being pumped into your brain, research has shown that trauma patients have a very large amygdala, but their hippocampus and other parts of the brain tend to be much smaller or decreased. So this is what contributes to their emotional or lack of emotional regulation, impulse, and their lack of logical thinking and reasoning. Now, as a result of that, keep in mind, their experiences and how they perceive things are very different than someone that has not been through trauma. And I'll give you an example if you want to take a look at some research done by Pollack et al. Back in, I believe it was 2000. And what they did was grab a group of students, group of people. They had the control group that had never been through, and then they had the experimental group that had been through. And they showed them a whole bunch of photographic simulations. And the simulation was between fear and anger. And as they showed them, the experimental group kept seeing anger long after the control group started to see fear. So that should let you know that because of their experiences, they see things differently. And if that stress response system is constantly in flux, cortisol and all of those other hormones are being pumped into the blood, this is what you get. Impaired immune function, change in fat metabolism, hyperglycemia, increased blood pressure, decrease in bone formation, and let's not forget what happens to the brain itself as a result. So keep these things in mind. So next we have what we call the Maslow Table for those that have been through ACE. Do you know that 5 of 10 people, or 5 of 10 of the leading causes of death, are associated with ACE? And it's not that ACE causes the death. There's not causation, but there is correlation. Because the child or the person has been through ACE, many times they have a disrupted neural development, or the neurons are not connecting as they should. So, knowing again that the brain is building from the bottom up, the choices are being made based off of your experiences. So their social, emotional, and cognitive development is impaired. Many of them begin to adopt very risky behavior, and as a result are more prone to disease, disability, and social problem, which usually ends in early death. And that's kind of like how that pyramid goes. So these are the things that I want you to be aware of when you're looking at their performance. Verbal comprehension, perceptual reasoning, working memory, full scale. If you look at foster care versus orphanage, you see the difference in how they're able to perform. And here are some of the symptoms that are associated with ACE. Now, much of what I get as far as research and my references come from the CDC, Psychology Today, NIH. So a lot of the things that I'm showing you now, you can also find there. But out of a survey that was done of over 300,000 adults, here were the prevailing symptoms. Attention and concentration issues. At least 59.2% of adults that had experienced ACE still have this particular symptom. 57.9% have negative self-image. Keep in mind, the way that we see ourselves, how we see ourselves, happens from childhood, and what we believe tends to reflect in our behavior. Impulse control, 53.1%. Aggression and risk-taking behavior, 45.8%. ODD or conduct disorder, 28.7%. So I say left, you say right. I say up, you say down. Keep in mind, when you're looking at conduct disorder, or you're looking at them, not wanting to do things, it may not be because they just want to be in opposition to you. It can simply be because this is the only place that they have where they can actually make a choice or have any control over anything. So if it's something that they really don't want to do, like say a group project, maybe you're putting them with the opposite sex, not knowing that they were molested or they were raped several times, and they don't have comfortability with the opposite sex in any type of a group setting. So these are things we don't know, but we have to think about. Overdependence and clinginess. That is something that happens for a student that maybe did not get love or anything at home, and they see something in you, and as a result, they're very prone to kind of be near you, or want to be near you, or want to talk to you, or want to reach out to you on a regular basis because you've presented yourself as what? Approachable, as human. Substance abuse, 9.5%. But that number is low because they're not including over-the-counter and prescription drugs as well. So keeping those things in consideration, think about the fear factor for students. One of the fears that they have, and it's an acronym, is that failure for them is expected and received. It's one thing to be expected, but it's another thing when they receive it into themselves. So now let's talk about the trauma-informed view of behavior. We talked about that diamond earlier. Now let's look at the diamond in the rough. Someone that has hidden exceptional characteristics or future potential but currently lacks the final touches that would make them or it truly stand out in the crowd. So when you look at your students, that's how you have to see them. I can recall having a student that came to my class late. Every class he was late. And most times he slept when he came into class. So in my mind, I'm just bewildered. I have no idea why you're paying to come to class, you come late, and then you sleep. So something, in me it just didn't sit well. So because of how I introduced myself in the very beginning of the class, I was really close with my students. So I didn't have a problem pulling him to the side and having a conversation with him and just asking him to be transparent with me, which he did not mind. He apologized for the lateness. He apologized for sleeping. But as it stood, his mother was a prostitute that would bring different men into the house, that he and his brother would be fighting these men throughout the night. And most times he wasn't getting to sleep till 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. And my class was at 9:30. And on top of that, he didn't have money. So he was walking 4 miles to come to the campus and 4 miles back. And I'm like, are you serious? In my mind, if I'm just looking at you, I'm looking at you as being lazy and doing whatever. But after hearing this from him, you try not to get your own emotions involved. I then, handed him over. We went together, but for him to speak with counseling so that they could see what they could do to help him out with, even his transportation getting back and forth to school. So these are the things we have to keep in mind. Most students that drop out or have issues, it's not because of their academic barrier. It's because of non-academic barriers that are not being addressed. So when we are looking at the trauma-informed view, that means removing labels. That means looking at students as individuals first. It means reinforcing our expectations, which may include not just differentiating the academic, but also the behavior expectations based on what we know and what we learn about our students. This is one that a lot of people don't like, but a system that offers students what they need, whether they qualify for accommodations or not. I mean, I'm sorry, but you have to be worthy to get any help or accommodations around here. That's something that has to change in order for us to be able to help our students. What I can tell you for sure is that the teacher-student connection has always, in any research that you've read, been one of the most powerful elements within the learning environment, whether you're in elementary, middle, high school, or higher education. It's that teacher-student relationship that basically forms the social context where learning takes place. So we have to keep that in mind. And unfortunately, you are essentially helping to repair what someone else, usually their parents, have caused. When you become trustworthy, you open the door for them to begin to trust other people as well. So fear no longer looks like failure expected and also received. It looks now like a faith that they have in themselves that erases any reservation that they ever had about what they could do. And why? Because you have taken the time to be a part of their life. Unknown author, but the quote said, "People don't care what you know until they know you care." When students know we care, that's when they will begin to care about what we know and to learn in our classrooms. So there's a plan of action that Bucks County Community College already has in place called CARES, where we're looking at conduct, academic success and integrity, retention, equity, and student success, placing value on building relationships with our students is essential. And again, one of the best quotes I ever came across, a teacher affects eternity. He or she can never tell where their influence stops, and you can never tell when it begins. So continue to do what you're doing. And one of the things that I want to add to that as a way to encourage you, different studies have been done throughout the years. A longitudinal study by Emmy Warner and Ruth Smith back in 1955 that looked over a group of students in Hawaii that had at least 4 of the indicators of ACE. They had very rough lives throughout the time, but then there was a remnant, 25%, that seemed in some way, shape, or form to become resilient. So when they were surveyed and when they were interviewed, they said it was one person, a teacher, that made them change their whole mindset about what they were deciding to do. So that is resilience. Resilience has been in place and really originated during the 1950s, following kind of like that post-war era. What can we do to help people recover quickly from difficulties? And that's what this particular research did. It looked at how these students and how these individuals were able to be resilient. And they were able to find resilience based off of what? How they were engaged by one person that just so happened to be a teacher. Howard Tuckman in 1975 did an experiment where he had graduate students and faculty actually teach courses, and he found that there was not a big difference between the two when it came to learning. The bigger difference was between the soft skills versus hard skills. The graduate students had soft skills that catered more to the students because they remembered what it was like to be a student. And where they may have dipped a little bit in their education and in their expertise in the area, they made up for it in their genuineness and in their approachability for students to talk to them. So keep that in mind. There has to be a balance between approachable as well as your knowledge, soft skills versus hard skills. So this is where I kind of want to open it up if anybody has any questions for me, and then I'm going to give you a quick reflection. Any questions at all? So this
I'm just trying to unmute myself. Okay. Every program has the microphone in a different place.
Yes.
I know this isn't a question. I just want to thank you for this really comprehensive presentation so far. It's super interesting. And so it really, as a community college professor, it's like, these issues are looming in the background of the students and barriers to their learning.
Yes.
But this just kind of confirms how it kind of manifests in adulthood and or whenever they're taking the class. So it's very interesting. Thank you so much for this data-based presentation.
I should probably share.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry. Thank you so much as well. This is one of the most interesting presentations on this topic, and thank you. Very, very well done. Thank you.
Thank you. I wish I had more time to really go into it, but I'm kind of like jumping through things because I want to give you kind of like the meat and potatoes. I will share with all of you that I am a product of 7 of the indicators of trauma, starting from age 6 on to probably 14. So I definitely know what it's like to go into a classroom and for a teacher not to understand me. In fact, we were all asked to be tested for special ed services when we were in school, and all of us actually scored higher than 130 on our IQ test. So we didn't need special ed, we needed emotional support. But our behavior, came across as needing academic support. So I know that feeling. I know having gone to college very early on a scholarship and just not being prepared. So I was that person that had to go back at 27, 28 as a non-traditional student and kind of go all the way through till 37 to then have all my degrees. So, and that's almost 13 years ago. So when I look back on it, my experiences on top of the research has really helped me to be instrumental to students that come into my classroom that are dealing with very similar things. So before I answer the next question, I just kind of want you guys to reflect in your classrooms by taking the temperature. How is the temperature in your classroom? And then ask yourself a few questions. Can all my students learn from me? What students do I need to consider when I'm planning my lessons? What goals and passions have I pursued, and was I successful in reaching them? How will I and the student know that they're making progress? And how have I progressed over the past few months, and in what areas can I improve? Those are very important things to ask yourself when you're looking at it. Because again, it's always been, K through 12 really needs to be worried about, engagement. And once they get to the college level, they're adults. It really isn't true. K through 16 needs to look at those things, because if you continue to look, we have a high percentage of freshmen that drop out, and it's not because they're missing it academically. It's so many other issues. So they've got to get the engagement piece from us in the classroom. They've got to feel that sense of belonging. We have to start to spearhead what we consider resilience. The jump back, the pop back, the start over, the reset button. We have to be the culprits of that. I mean, keep in mind, on the community college level, we've got 60% of students that come in that need developmental courses. 60%. On the 4-year level, 40% of students come in needing help developmentally in either reading, writing, or math. So if that doesn't scream engagement, I really don't know what does. So I'm hoping that you guys were able to get from me what you needed today. And if you have any questions, I'll be here to answer them.
Hi, Janice, this is Barbara. Yeah, it was so emotional when I saw those brains, it was just, And I attended an earlier workshop with Judy, and the statistics are staggering. They're staggering. And I want to thank you and the others for bringing this awareness to us. I mean, I teach math, so my students come pre-wired with the I hate math virus, I always say.
Exactly.
But they suffer from such trauma. I call it the 3 Fs: fear, frustration, and failure. And plus, like as you said, they're bringing all these other issues to the classroom. And retention is an issue in our developmental math classes.
Absolutely.
Because,
well, keep in mind, too, when you're younger, right, I do this exercise in person where I have everyone partner, and I have them draw pictures. They have 60 seconds to draw a picture of one another. And then I tell them now to come up front and show their pictures. How many people out of those adults do you think actually comes to the front? Not many. The ones that come to the front are either very bold or they can actually draw. But if I were to ask a group of kindergarten students to come to the front, all of them would come running. What's the difference? Somewhere along the line, you were told that you weren't good at something, or you couldn't do something, or expectations for failure were put on you in those areas. So by the time they get to the college, they're already pre-programmed and pre-wired on quote unquote what they're good at and what they're not good at. So if they've already predetermined that they're not good at something, there's the self-defeating, prophecy that then doesn't even allow them to put whatever straits that they need to put in place to be successful.
And be resilient, yeah. I incorporate a lot of resources in my courses, but still retention is always an issue.
I would say also to look at what they call the flipped classroom. That is something that works very, very well, especially in courses that are difficult like math. So what the flipped classroom does, it allows you as a professor to basically tape your lectures so that they're looking at the lectures when they're outside of class, coming to class, ready for the discussion, and what would be their homework outside of class is what they're actually doing in class. So now you get an opportunity to see who's having problems, who's struggling, and you can work with them on a more individual basis versus, trying to send them home with homework. And then depending on what their situation is when they get home, you know what I mean? It may not be conducive to them being able to do those assignments, especially if they're already struggling with math.
I teach online learning, so I teach e-learning courses.
Okay.
It's hybrid, and they use a platform called Alex. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
I've heard of it. I've never used it, but I've heard of it.
It's artificial intelligence, and every student is working on just what they need, which I like, based on innocence. Not the way you and I may have learned, open the book and turn to page 67 and do 23. No, it's all individualized now. That's the good part.
That's good.
You take what they need, not what you and I need. But I feel like if I did more, what you're saying, videotaping of a certain section or lesson, Yeah, it might make me more approachable.
Yeah, and it allows them to rewind it as many times as they need to see you do it again. In cahoots with, KhanAcademy.org, where they can do the same
Right.
thing.
Yep,
So there are a lot of different platforms that can be used to assist our students. It's just really just trying to be aware of where their deficits are.
Is there a link to that? You shared this form you said you had them fill out. Is there a link to your PowerPoint, or we'll be able to access it
I
afterwards?
have no idea. I'll probably have to talk to
Greg,
whomever is in charge and have
yes,
Greg
yes,
do it for me.
yes.
Yeah.
Because I'd love to see it. Can I put my email in the chat, or yeah? But you're right. He
So
said
let
that.
me send you my email, and then that way you
Great.
you guys can kind of stay
You
in
shared some
contact with
form
me.
that I'd like to incorporate. Yeah.
So I'll give you my
Well,
Bucks email because I am a part-time professor there.
Me
So
too.
that
I
way,
am too. I teach there as well. Yeah.
yeah,
I
I'm
wanted to say
English
that
and literature. So
what you presented was just so just opened my eyes so much more to my students. I teach ESL, and this summer I'm going to start teaching refugees. So everything you were saying was like, oh my God, I can't even. I mean, just my regular ESL class, I know that some of the women, especially, have experienced trauma.
mhm.
Just how they engage, and when males are in class, some of them they won't really speak, and then when the males drop off, because I hate to say it sometimes, because of their work schedules, they work. A lot of them drop off, so I'm just left with the females in class, and once that happens, they start engaging, they start talking. I'm just thinking of how much of this I want to watch this all over again. How much of this would be so helpful in bringing out the engagement and learning how to teach them better, because everyone learns languages in a different way. And I'm speaking with teaching women and men from all languages. I don't have just Spanish or just French. So, and then on top of that, recognizing which all of the elements that you brought up in this study, just actually basically gives me more patience.
Mhm.
It's just going to make me have more patience.
Now,
And
let me just tell you this part too. Keep in mind when you are working with students, especially if they're from the Eastern
mhm,
Hemisphere, women are more subservient to men. They
mhm,
don't talk much. If a man is talking, they are to be silent.
mhm, mhm,
I know as a teacher, even through K through 12, I had issues where um, one of the students had done something wrong, and I had to reprimand him and send something home. And the father came in um, and didn't want to talk because I was a female and wanted to talk to a male. I said, no, we don't do that here. I'm his teacher, and I'm the only person you're going to be able to talk to. Now, let's get to what happened. So it was like,
mhm,
I'm not talking to you. You're a woman. Where's the male?
He had
And
a
I
bias.
explained to him, I said, in
Kindergarten.
your country, that is probably how, the norm is, but this is not the norm here in the United States. We actually, do reprimand our students, whether male or female. And when we need to have parent-teacher conferences, the parent speaks to the immediate teacher.
mhm.
Janice,
So
he was not educated about that at all. He had
whether
no
he was
clue.
educated or not, that's how he came to the school.
He was clueless.
Whether he was educated or not, that's how he came to the school. And I even recognize how the son talked to the mother. Even though that was
Mhm.
his mother, he
Yeah,
still basically could talk to her
yeah.
how he wanted to because she was a female. So, you keep those things in mind when you're teaching.
The culture.
Also
Mhm.
Yeah,
keep in
right.
mind culturally, a lot of Asian students won't say anything because they're taught that the teacher is the guru, and whatever the teacher says is pretty much law. So they're
Mm.
not going to question you, even if they don't agree with some of the things that you may be saying. They'll never
Mhm.
question it. And then it also sometimes looks like their parents are not involved. It's not that they're not involved. They trust the system and they trust teachers to be just that, teachers.
Right.
So that's a situation where if the teacher said something, it's what the teacher said.
You're right.
So I, had to take all those things into consideration when teaching. And it's like, whoo, and it was difficult because teaching psychology, it's not about what I said as the guru. It's about you guys coming up with different research that will dispute something that I said and you being able to argue it. And I had a very difficult time pulling some of my students that were Asian, out of that shell to argue. It's like, no, like you said it and that's what it is. And it's like, no, this is actually class. We have fishbowl discussions, we have debate. So I need you to come on out of that shell, so that took a lot. And this was at Johns Hopkins. That took a lot to get those students to kind of come out and speak, on different topics that I wanted them to kind of give different, areas of their opinions. And I would even switch them. I would have them talk to me about what they felt about a subject, and then I would make them research it from the opposite viewpoint. So if you agreed strongly with something, I made you research it and speak on it from strongly disagree. That wasn't always easy, but yeah, it's a lot that goes on in teaching, and it's not just come into the classroom, hand out the syllabus, go over it, let's get it done, and walk the classroom anymore. We have a lot of students that are hurting. Again, if you get a chance, read that article in the New York Times from May the 15th, and it's entitled "Students Are Not Okay."
Hold on. I want to write it down.
Let me just make sure.
And Anita, I would like to get your email address. I want to get you.
Okay.
Can you put it in the chat? I put mine
Sure.
there. That's
Yes.
okay.
Let me just make sure, because I actually have the article right here.
Denise, how did you get to speak at Faculty of the Future?
Is college students are not okay.
Okay,
And it's the New York Times, Sunday, May 15th.
May 15th. College students are not okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Very good article. Definitely worth the read. So they had proposals where you could propose what it was that you wanted to talk about. So I put in my proposal, and my proposal was...
I'll have to pay attention. Yeah, next year. About what time?
Henry and Millicent, you guys are still on here. Are there any questions or anything that you guys want to talk about that I can address? You've been quiet. I don't know if they're still on.
No, they left. I could see.
Karen?
Thank you so much. This is so informative. Oh my goodness. I really do appreciate you sharing this information, your personal story. I'm a new adjunct, so I work full time in the IT field, and I just started teaching this calendar year. Sorry for the low, my speaker is a little off. This is just so awesome because I can see it, and what is amazing to me, because I am not an educator by trade, but I can see this in the classroom as an instructor. So thank you.
You're welcome. I'm glad I could shed some light.
Yes. You all have a best day. Thank you.
Millicent, did you want to say or add anything? Was there anything, any questions or anything you had that I could address?
No, you were awesome. I was just listening to the end of the end replies. And I'm actually doing, I'm a doctoral student, and I'm doing my dissertation on faculty perceptions of students with PTSD at the community college. So I would love to keep talking to you.
Did you get my email? I put it
I
in the
did.
sheet. Reach
I did.
out.
Thank
Let me
you.
know what you need. I have plenty of research on that.
Thank you so much. And I totally agree with your comment of it goes beyond K through 12, and there seems to be a drop off, and that's what I want to address.
Mm-hmm.
So
Believe it
thank
or
you.
not, the drop off for engagement, if you ever get a chance, the Gallup poll
Okay.
does some research. Thought I had it here. I might have given it to my son. But the Gallup poll has some research. Yeah, I think he took it upstairs because he's trying to create a survey for his classmates. But it does some research on hope for the future, engagement with students, engagement with teachers. But it asks about 300 some odd thousand students how they feel about teacher engagement and how they feel about hope for them to reach their, careers and their dreams in the future. And ask a bunch of different questions. And what I found, I actually did the research. I pulled numbers from the Keystones and I pulled numbers from the Gallup poll. And what I found, elementary level, they tend to do very, very well. But from middle school to high school, engagement and Keystone scores drop, and then they level out after 10th grade. So what I realized, and I would have to do more research on it, is that once you get to middle school, the difference is you have a different teacher. You have several teachers, and all of them don't have the same level of engagement, which becomes a problem. Where in elementary, you're in the same class all day. You have the same level of engagement. So more than likely, you're going to do well on your tests because you're in the same place. Once you go to middle school and high school, you're moving around everywhere. And every teacher doesn't engage well. And when I do these presentations with high school teachers, I admonish them to look at the class average or the difference in the class average between classes that they have advisory with and then students that they just see, once a day or once every couple of days. What you'll find is that you have a higher GPA in the class that you have advising with because you have a relationship with those students. So you see them in advising and then you teach them again sometime during that day. And why it levels out at 10th grade is because most students know by 8th grade whether or not they want to stay in school. But because 8th grade is the end of middle school, they'll try 9th grade. They'll try it. And then if they find that their experience is not what they want it to be, they'll drop out. So those that are there 10th, 11th, and 12th are there because they want to be there. That's what's left over. So that's why it tails out come 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. So there's a lot that's going on. I mean, even as an economy, we suffer because if you look at the difference between pay and someone that has not graduated or dropped out and then the pay of someone that has a high school diploma, there's a big, disparity. If you look at high school diploma versus those that have a bachelor's, there's a large, gap there. So it's not that there are not a lot of jobs available. There are not a lot of people that qualify for the jobs that are available because they haven't finished school. So it's a trickle butterfly effect that seems to be taking place, and it's something that needs to be addressed. Because when you look at it, our baby boomers are retired. And as we continue to go on with the generations, I shudder when I look at the generation underneath of me and what their work ethic looks like and what things may look like at the point that I'm ready to retire. So those are things that as educators, we have to kind of take those into consideration. Yeah.
Well,
Thank you so much. Thank you. I will definitely be in contact.
Absolutely, please. And let me know where I met you at, just in case I don't remember your name. Let me know that it was at the Faculty of the Future.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming on. Have a great rest of your day.